So, good evening and welcome to the beautiful historical Marionette Theater. Please take your seats. The show is about to begin. Round of applause. Well, good evening, Toppy. It is a fine night here at the theater, and we have some company along with us.
Yes, it's a bright full moon out there. It's the outdoors. It's very bright. Anyways, go ahead.
So of course, there's been a few things that have occurred recently. We've had a good old Mother's Day. Did you do anything for Sweet Mama this year?
I got her some plants and help her plant them. That's yeah.
I think I remember you saying that because of the day of the week that it falls for us, you don't often end up having that as your day off. So I'm sure it was a makeup. We at the chateau here, Chateau Star Sage, ended up doing a makeup lunch date with Mama Billy. We went out and we had lunch at a place we haven't been to in a while. And then, of course, like any good mother-in-law, she tagged along when we went about our errands, which, usually entails a fair amount of thrifting in dollar stores and
Excellent.
yeah, and hubby can tell if I'm lying because he's here with us tonight, aren't you, honey?
Yes, I am. I got to get better on that stupid button.
Well, tonight's show is not about the Jetsons, although there is a bit of technology involved. And so we're going to briefly hop across the pond because it's a special anniversary coming up this fall. It is the 60th anniversary of a British sci-fi phenomenon known as Doctor Who. And so joining us today are returning guest and friend of the show, the Shy Yeti, Paul of the Shy Life podcast.
Hello, I'm back.
Hey! I'm glad that we were able to synchronize our watches and make sure that we didn't come at the same time as the tea tray.
Yeah.
And this is a first on the show because you and Hubby Billy are actually virtually at the same table.
Yeah, it's good. Yes, we impart our Doctor Who knowledge.
Yes, I am going to be competing to get a word in today because I was introduced to this phenomenon by my husband. So I am not the authority, which is why we've brought the two of you in.
I actually had to force him to watch a few episodes.
Dear, oh dear.
And we'll get into the ins and outs of how I came to traipse into that realm shortly. But for now, I do believe that our senior showgirl is lurking about. Gertie.
Yeah, I got morning voice. Not that it's morning.
Oh.
Oh my God. Oh boy, you don't know the sacrifices I make to be here. Anyways, hi Paul.
Hello. Hi, Gertie.
You're so cute.
Yeah.
She's all dolled up and wearing her TARDIS blue dress. And if I'm not mistaken, that perfume, is that Lemon Pledge?
Yeah. How did you? Boy, it's like you can smell me. All right.
Well, it is the morning after. So, Madame, if you could get down to the stage, we're going to do this live. We have an introduction to tonight's discussion.
All righty, I'm on my way. Well, there she goes.
Woo! Keep it on!
The Doctor is a misunderstood, kindly older gentleman whose inventions include a mysterious time machine. While out on his rounds, a policeman mistakes the masquerading police box invention, and the group finds themselves thrust more than a century in the future when menacing Gallic aliens have invaded Will they free their time machine from the fallen rubble? Will the Doctor find his lost granddaughter? Grab your wellies and a tarp. It's time for Dalek Invasion of Earth 2150 AD. Take it away, fellas.
What do you get when you take a dash to the silver screen? A pinch of golden oldies and a smidgen of screaming. It's time for Matinee Minutia with your hosts DJ and Toppy.
Back. Welcome to Matinee Minutia. This is a special Doctor Who anniversary discussion, and as our senior showgirl just mentioned, we're going to be visiting the phenomenon a la the 1966 theatrical release Dalek's Invasion of Earth 2150 AD. So we'll be discussing the cast of that, as well as some favorite moments and recollections of the Doctor Who verse, as we call it. So, Toppy, if you'll read that next line there about setting the stage.
Ordinarily, we'd be setting the stage here with DJ to put things into perspective in terms of things going on during the film, things going on during the time of the film we're discussing release. But we got the Shy Yeti here, and we're going to take advantage. Paul, turn your Wayback Machine, and we're going to head to the year 1966, well before you were born. And what was going on in your part of the world?
Well, a brief overview of 1966. The Doctor Who TV series had premiered just before the holidays in 1963, on the heels of the tragedy of the assassination of President Kennedy. A prototype fast reactor, new generation nuclear reactor, opens on the north coast of Scotland. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, which is the US equivalent of Treasury Department, James Callaghan, who actually in the 70s ended up being Prime Minister, he announces decimalisation of the pound. New coins are issued, now 100 pence to the pound. Prior to that, a pound was 24 shillings or 240 pennies. Barclays introduces the Barclay card. The first British credit card is released. By the summer, the economy saw the start of a 6-month wage and price freeze. England beats West Germany 4-2 to win the 1966 World Cup at Wembley. Britain's first Polaris ballistic missile equipped submarine, HMS Resolution, launched at Barrow in Furness. Meanwhile, back to real life TV Doctor Who, actor William Hartnell makes his last regular appearance as the first Doctor in the concluding moments of episode 4 of the Doctor Who serial, The 10th Planet, as he regenerates into the second Doctor, who was played by Patrick Troughton.
Well, so, talking a little bit about money there, Paul, were you, in your university days when you got your first Barclay card? Because I know I got a pre-approved card in the mail while I was at college. I didn't have a job and they didn't care, so that was my out. I charged my one-way ticket to La La Land, and here we are in debt.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think it might have been a bit later, but yeah, I did get one, sort of probably when I had my first job. I would have been would have ended badly had it. Well, it probably ended badly anyway. But there we go.
Well, the important thing is we've learned some responsibilities since those days, right?
Yeah.
Well.
Well, enough about politics. Toppy, we normally talk about those who came into the world at the time of this film. And in celebration of our guest from across the pond, we're going to focus a little more on our births there in the United Kingdom. Tell us about the celebrities that joined us in 1966.
Alrighty. We saw some voice here over there in the UK. Lisa Stansfield. She's an R&B soul singer and songwriter. She's got 8 albums, so there. Samantha Fox, another singer and a dancer. Helena Bonham Carter, hey, we know her over here.
Mm.
Film and stage actor, partner of Tim Burton. I did not know that. Are they still together?
The jury's out on that. Depends
Ha!
who you ask.
Okay. Bellatrix Lestrange. Oh, God, I want to use that name as a character on the Smellcast. Bellatrix Lestrange in the Harry Potter series. Also, more recently as Princess Margaret, Elizabeth's sister on Netflix's The Crown. And also born in '66, Vanessa Angel, a film and TV actor. You'd know her from Weird Science '90s TV series.
Oh, and gentlemen, if you will remind me later on, there is a Peter Cushing. We normally have a Star Trek connection, but tonight we're going to bring things back to the lead actor in tonight's
Yeah.
film, Peter Cushing. Remind me of Weird Science and the Peter Cushing connection, if you will.
Okay. Speaking of reminding, DJ, I didn't, and are you recording?
I am.
Oh, okay.
I am recording in 2 places, so fingers crossed.
Okay.
Oh, so I didn't really have a in theaters, but I'm just going to see.
I could tell you a little bit about that.
Uh-huh.
This first movie was something somewhere around between the 10th and 20th place. It was a success. It was a moneymaker in the UK, and it certainly attracted the fans of Doctor Who and other people who had no clue really what Doctor Who was. So it was considered a success because the producers bought the rights to do a movie and 2 sequels. And we're talking about the first sequel tonight. And the first movie, also about the Daleks. I'm sorry. You know what? DJ, edit all of that out because everything I said there was absolutely wrong. All right, let me start over. I can tell you a little bit about how well this movie did. It was a big old flop. It did not perform well in UK, and it did absolutely not perform well in the United States. The producers bought the rights to do 3 movies. The first one, also about the Daleks, that was a success, and it did make money, and it performed extremely well in the UK. And of course, that made them say, only a year later, let's pop out this sequel, also about the Daleks. But the third movie was never realized because our movie tonight performed dismally, and so they never did do that second sequel.
Yeah, the Dalek Invasion of Earth 2150 AD was released in the summer of '66. And, sci-fi was a popular theme around that time. And one of the films that came out also that year was a film adaptation of the Ray Bradbury novel Fahrenheit 451.
That was a British movie, wasn't it?
It was.
Yeah.
And you were going to say, Paul, before I so rudely stepped on your toes.
Well, I was just going to say that both the movies and the third one, which was never made, were actually based on stories that went out as TV episodes. So there is a 6-part version of the Dalek Invasion of Earth with William Hartnell, and they have changed things for the movie. But and there's also a 7-part original story of the Daleks, which makes the plot for the first movie. I mean, I can never understand why the second film did so badly, because it's on location. I think it's a lot more exciting than the original, but I guess maybe Dalek Mania had moved on and maybe Beatlemania had taken over, which are quite different things. There we go.
I personally blame Barbara because she couldn't be there for that second movie. But, if we want to put our minds back in the realm of the '60s when Doctor Who was new, We didn't have a lot of the conveniences that we have nowadays, and we certainly did not have this phenomenon of syndicated television where you could catch the reruns. So
Mm.
I would have to guess that part of the appeal that they were trying to promote with making the movies was the fact that back in those days, if you didn't catch the TV show when it aired, you missed out totally because it wasn't repeated, and the next time you were going to see it, it was the same day and time. So if you had a schedule that you had to live by, you just missed out on certain things. There was no talk about it on Monday because you weren't setting your VCR to record. There were no DVRs then, and some episodes
You-
disappeared from the face of the earth because the BBC literally burned them.
Yeah, I mean, the Daleks were really big in those first few years of Doctor Who. William Hartnell had about 4 stories, and one of them was 12 parts. And then the first Patrick Troughton story was a Dalek story, and then they did another one in that same first series of his. So yeah, it was they were a really big thing, and there was talk of them having spin-off series, and which never really came to pass. And then they were in comic books, and they were really big. It's weird to have like the baddies ending up having their own comic strip in it.
Yeah, actually, our movie tonight, I think, was developed into a comic book that ran like a one page of it would run a week or something like that in the Sunday funnies or something like that. You mentioned the writer Houghton. What was it, Paul?
Well, there was Terry Nation who
Yeah.
created the Daleks and did a lot of the early Dalek stories.
But I mean, the writer of tonight, they were actual writers for the TV series, I think, right? That did this movie. They wrote it.
Yeah, and there's even 1 or 2 people who had minor roles in it, and the Dalek voices are the people who did the Dalek voices in the TV show. And,
Oh, those voices. Woo. Ah, well, let me tell you a little bit about the director. He, a really fairly prolific director. He knew his stuff. He was a by the books guy. His name's Gordon Fleming, born in '34. He passed away in '95. And he started out on TV on British TV series like shows like The Younger Generation, The Saint, we know that in America. The Avengers, we know that too here. Some of these others don't know a thing about something called The Baron, Crown Court, ITV Playhouse, and many others. So he was all over the place on TV, practicing his craft of directing. So when it came time to do movies, he was very well equipped, and 2 of the movies he directed were Doctor Who movies, the 1960s. Oh, that's not correct. This wasn't that the first movie didn't come out in the 60s, in the 1960s. At any rate, oh, I'm sorry. Edit. Boy, it's a good thing we're not doing this live tonight. Okay, so Doctor Who and the Daleks was the first movie, came out in '65, and then our movie tonight, Daleks Invasion Earth 2150, came out 1 year later. He directed them both, and even Fleming also got around to Hollywood and did direct some American movies. One was called The Split in 1968. It was a crime drama with Jim Brown, Ernest Borgnine, and Gene Hackman. Back in Britain, in 1970, he directed a British war film, The Last Grenade. So he was a very practical director, and the filming, although of our movie tonight, poor Mr. Fleming there had some trouble because there were numerous accidents, and also the star of the film fell ill. And you'll kind of note that Doctor Who isn't in the movie all that much. And that's because he was, the actor, Peter Cushing, was ill, and they had to kind of scramble and rewrite things for other actors to take over because, the production had to go on. But at the end of the day, the director got it done. He was way over time on it because of all the things that happened, and it was over budget. He went over budget, but maybe that's another reason why there was never a third movie. Anyways, that's director Gordon Fleming, our man.
Okay, so, before we move on to the cast, the talent that made up this crew, I thought we would take this opportunity to do a little roundtable briefly on our initial impressions and maybe our first honk exposures to the phenomenon that is Doctor Who. Now, I am going to defer to, the person that is also responsible for my bills. Hubby, if you could dust off the microphone there, here's your chance to be in the spotlight. Could you tell us a little bit about the early days when you first came to know of Doctor Who and how it came to be that you saw it on television in the US of A where it wasn't even being made? He's possibly on mute. We'll give him a minute to get back into the fray.
Sorry, I had a screaming little girl down here. She was demanding food.
And her name wasn't Susan. So I was saying that we're each just going to give a brief impression of our first entrance into the phenomenon of Doctor Who. When did you see it first? How did it come to be? And maybe your initial thoughts on the movie.
Well, I started watching Doctor Who at 11 p.m. on Saturdays in the late 70s with my dad. It wasn't shown any other time in the U.S., in my area at least, until very late at night. So it was something that was special to allow me to stay up until almost 1 in the morning to watch this show, which is quite interesting. So it wasn't mainstream, I guess you could call it. And speaking about tonight's movie, I don't think I saw them until the late 80s. They didn't really show them on American television. So it quickly became one of my favorite TV shows. And one of the things that's not often talked about is the connection with it with H.G. Wells' Time Machine and the period that it came out when it was about, 3 years after H.G. Wells premiered on the big screen. So.
Oh, yeah, and you're talking about the 50s movie that popularized the time machine on screen.
1960s.
Oh, it was 60s. Well, forgive me for snoozing.
I believe 1960 is when it came out.
Yeah, with Rod Taylor.
So it always amused me that, a few guys sit down and go, we're going to make a TV show like The Time Machine. How can we improve it? How can we make things better? And what can we do with it?
And I believe that you also mentioned to me, as part of that late night TV viewing, that your father actually often worked overnights. So this indeed was a rare opportunity because, you got to see Doctor Who and, as you said, spend time with Dad.
It was pretty much the only time I ever got to spend with him.
And that, as they say, is another story. So, going to the next
Contestant
on
No.
the marionette is sometimes right. Mr. Paul Chandler, the Shy Yeti. What was your initial entry into this phenomenon?
Well, I mean, it was still a pretty popular show when I got into it, and I was about 6. And I don't remember if I was how long it took me to get into it. All I can remember is when I did get into it, I got into it in a big way in about 1979, which was towards the end of Tom Baker's time as the Doctor, and it kind of, Star Wars was being big around that time, and it might as well have not existed for all the interest I had in it, because Doctor Who, once it took over completely. I must be, I'm a one-man sci-fi fan. But as for the movies, they got played quite often. I feel like on Saturday morning TV, perhaps in the summer holidays when they weren't. Because there used to be shows that were kind of regular shows on Saturday mornings, but in the summer they gave those shows a break and they'd show a movie, and I feel like they showed the Doctor Who ones as much as they possibly could. So I saw those quite a lot, and by the time they were on, I already knew about the show, and I was always particularly fond of this one, of the two, but. Yeah.
And so I'll take the turn last. Toppy, I know that you dabble in the Doctor Who verse, and I've had some of that responsibility as well as our guest. But let us know how you came to be hitchhiking on this time machine.
Hitchhiker Guide to the Galaxy. I see what you're doing there. So I also became acquainted with Doctor Who in the 70s, probably because of Star Wars' success. Our local public television station in Binghamton, New York said, "Hey, what do we have that we can get our hands on that's science fiction-y and spacey?" And public television was well rehearsed in bringing British productions over and playing them for American audiences, and that's what happened. And it was during the Tom Baker era. And I first saw it on public television. Billy, I guess our Binghamton station played it during the day. So I did not have to wait until very late at night to see it. And I could swear it was played Monday through Friday. Maybe not, but I swear it was in the afternoon. Anyways, I almost immediately dug it, and here's the weird reason why. I didn't know Doctor Who from nothing, but I loved the fact that it was shot on video, and it just had that quality that I love about video, and it had that crazy kind of low budget but very clever sets, and they're making the most of everything. I love that kind of production where they're just, we need a set, put it together. I know it's cardboard and paper mache, and it ends up looking great. And the special effects, they're for video, and I didn't care. I loved it, and it's just that weird video gestalt that I loved about it. Probably that's what kept me watching. And then time moved on, and I never saw Doctor Who again. Until very recently, DJ showed me some of the latest Doctor stuff. And but yeah, the whole Doctor Who comeback, I never watched any of that. But I'll save that for the end. I did see one episode. I'll save that at the end when we talk about our favorite episode. So there you go.
Okay. So I was a latecomer to the Doctor Who verse. I grew up out in the sticks, so unlike Toppy and Hubby, I didn't really have a local station that was showing it, and I didn't have a parent that said, "Isn't this cool? Let's watch this together." My dad was more into the golden age of television and musicals from the 50s and 60s. However, I do have a uncle who I'm finding out in later years in life I'm taking more and more after. Um, he was a manager of an electronics store in the 90s. He's actually, I think, even possibly a district manager. There goes
Radio Shack?
Yes, there goes my nerd meter. Um, but my uncle used to drop by, and I'm told that he used to help clean out mom and dad's refrigerator in their newlywed years. But he turned on the television in the family room. You know, the den is what we call those. That's our room that has the paneling back in the 70s and 80s. And I didn't quite get what he was watching because, again, it was on a budget. And in this case, I think it was Tom Baker, and the music at the time seemed a little bit like an old soap opera where there might have been an organ or something playing. But that was my initial exposure, honk. And then fast forward to more recent years when the show was rebloithed. I remember renting it on Netflix in the mail, getting those DVDs in the little paper envelopes, seeing Christopher Eccleston, and in those days, in the early not aughts, I guess is what we say, because it was rebooted in I think '06 or '07 ish or something like that. And anyways, we did not have it on American television as it was being made new. It would be months and months sometimes before they would repeat the episodes that had already premiered in England, like 6 months or a year before. But finally, we did eventually get to a point where we got them around the same weekend, I think. And when hubby and I met and moved in together, David Tennant was just ending his multi-year run, and I had just started seeing the show in new runs, and it was just in time to see him retire and me see my first regeneration into Matt Smith. And I will have you know, at first I was not having it, but then I had that same experience that all fans do, is that was my doctor. And no, I don't want to see them leave. I don't want to say goodbye. So, yes, hubby had some involvement with my introduction to Doctor Who, and as they say, that is that. So, okay.
I have to add here, he gets very bitter and angry every regeneration, and it takes a couple of episodes for him to fall for the new Doctor. But every time we go through a little mourning and bitterness spell.
All right.
I will say, though, that I feel that Jodie Whittaker, the latest actor in the role, was wronged by the pandemic, because we should have had another season or series, as they say in the UK, before she had to go. So we got too little of the 13th Doctor on screen. Or was she the 14th?
She's the 13th. The next one is the 14th, and then there'll be the 15th quite quickly. So
Okay. Well, I figured she was lucky 13 because when I was a kid, my role models on TV were Claire Huxtable on The Cosby Show and Dr. Crusher on Next Generation.
Well, let's explain this regeneration thing to the uninitiated. Well, practically speaking, let's just put it that way. First of all, actors would come into the role and be there for a while and kind of want to leave. And they kind of wanted the series to continue. And so we have the introduction of this whole idea that the Doctor regenerates from time to time. And that explains why Doctor Who looks different as the years go on. I think it's genius. I don't know who thought of that, but what a great way to have continuity, but have different actors come and go. He regenerates. Of course he does. Wonderful. So, by the way, I don't think the movie tonight refers to regeneration in any way. They just, it's just Peter Cushing is Doctor Who.
It's around it's around the same time as I'm not quite 100% sure of the months, but it probably hadn't happened the first generation. They must have known it was, or the BBC people knew it was going to happen, but the film people may not have done at that stage. So yeah, that whole I'm not quite sure exactly on the timings of sort of how much planning went into that before it happened. So yeah.
It was about, I think, sorry to interrupt. It was about, I think, 6 months, because it was in the fall that they
Yeah.
showed the episode, in June
Yeah.
or July when the movie came out.
Yeah, so it's before.
And allegedly, as the grapevine goes, there was a falling out with one of the producers before William Hartnell conveniently took ill.
Yeah.
But that's a fun part with this movie, is it's a snapshot of Doctor Who at its current period.
Mm.
When you look back on it, not realizing, not knowing, where are the Time Lords? Does he regenerate? Where's the sonic screwdriver? All of the fun stuff that has compiled into the show over decades is sadly missing from this, because it hadn't been thought of yet. So this is a neat little snapshot of Doctor Who, very early 60s.
I believe in the first of the films, it's not really covered as much in the second one, but I'm sure in the first one it's more like he's a professor-y type scientist who might. There's no sort of detail as to whether he's human or not human.
Right.
They don't really mention it at all in the second one at all, and it's kind of presumed you've seen the first one, I suppose.
Yeah, I don't think they use the word Time Lord at all.
No, they wouldn't have done.
And in these movies, he's an inventor. Is really how they, he's got a great brain, and he's an inventor. Really, he invented a telephone time machine.
And I am of the understanding that originally in the early versions of Doctor Who's story, there wasn't a connection between the little girl who was traveling with the older gentleman. But then some of the people that might have been working for the censors said, we can't have that. That's inappropriate. So this is his granddaughter, and she's traveling around with her grandfather, and that's her teacher. So, now we all have a reason that we can be together in the same room without otherwise being supervised. And speaking of supervision, we have a actor in the lead. The title of the show, of course, is Doctor Who, and we have the leading man, Mr. Peter Cushing, who played the Doctor in Dalek Invasion of Earth 2150, our discussion tonight. And if you would do us the honors, Mr. Sci-Fi, please tell us about Mr. Peter Cushing.
Yeah, as you say, he played the Doctor. They refer to him as Doctor Who, which is only really in the films. He's very rarely referred to as Doctor Who in the TV show. Even that's the name of the show. But anyway, Peter Cushing was born in Surrey, UK, where I'm talking to you from now. He was inspired to act by his favourite aunt, who was a stage actress. He began acting in the 1940s, had a supporting role in the 1952 version of Moulin Rouge, which starred Zsa Gabor. By his passing in 1994, he had 131 acting credits. Peter Cushing's film prior to Dalek Invasion was called Island of Terror, which is described as an isolated remote island community is threatened by an attack by tentacled silicates, which liquefy and digest bone and tissue. Sounds lovely. Romantic comedy, I presume. His film after this film was Frankenstein Created Woman, which was one of the many Hammer films he did. In the 5 years leading up to the Dalek Invasion, he did 15 films. He appeared in 4 in 1961 alone, and another 4 in 1965. And he continued through the 70s. And by the 1980s, he was still working in film, appearing in just 6 films before his final film a decade later, which was called A Touch of the Sun, with Oliver Reed and Keenan Wynn. And that's described as a bumbling US Marine captain is assigned to retrieve a space capsule from a despotic African ruler.
And we should mention, for those that just may not have heard of Peter Cushing or know what he looks like, well, for heaven's sakes, he had a role in the first Star Wars movie that came out, and of course, I can't think of his name. What character did he play?
Didn't he get choked to death for his troubles?
No, not to death, but
Certainly roughed up.
Grand
No.
Moff Tarkin.
there you go.
Oh,
So Peter Cushing became known to a whole new generation because of Star Wars. As a matter of fact, so did Alec Guinness. But anyways, so there you go. Most people, if you've seen Star Wars, and of course everyone has, you know Peter Cushing.
so I'm going to share my callback to Peter Cushing. Earlier, we talked about some of the UK celebrities who celebrated a birth in the year of this film in '66, and among those was Vanessa Angel. Now, as was mentioned, in the '90s, Vanessa Angel appeared on American television in the TV adaptation of the John Hughes Weird Science. Now, the callback to Peter Cushing in this case is during the beginning of the film when the young boys are cooking up the idea of making a woman with their computer. They're watching a bunch of late night horror movies. And one of those is the Peter Cushing film, Frankenstein Created Woman. So while they're cooking up the idea of making a woman, you see this beautiful scene from Frankenstein Created Woman where Peter Cushing says, "No, woman."
Great comment. I'm going to talk about the actor who played the granddaughter of Dr. Hugh in a second, but before I forget to mention this, Peter Cushing is so associated with Hammer movies that I went into this just assuming that our movie tonight was a Hammer movie. I was surprised to find out, no, it's not. It's not a Hammer movie. That's how associated, at least for me, Peter Cushing is to movies. That Hammer, Peter Cushing, Christopher Lee.
But Toppy, the connection that it does have is that although it doesn't appear on screen, as well as being in Hammer films, he was in a lot of Amicus films, which were like the anthology films like Tales from the Crypt and a lot of those that went through the late 60s and into the 70s. And the company who made Amicus films made the Dalek films, but before they'd come up with the name Amicus. So this is an early Amicus film, as was the previous one. So I guess there is the connection with that strand of his career.
Interesting. Well, let's talk about the lovely Roberta Tovey, who's a little Goyle dressed in red. She pops right out on the screen in these Technicolor movies. Roberta Tovey played the Susan, the granddaughter of Doctor Who. She was born in 1953. She is an English actress. She's appeared in movies and television. And probably her best known role is that of Susan in both of the Doctor Who movies of this period that starred Peter Cushing. But she also appeared in some other productions, something called Never Let Go in 1960, Touch of Death in 61, A High Wind in Jamaica in 65, Runaway Railway in 65, some others called Operation Third Form in 66, The Beast in the Cellar in 1970. I want to see that
I
movie.
think I have a copy.
She was also on a TV series, Not in Front of the Children, from 67 to 68. She was in something much, 10 years later, she was in a movie called Going Straight, and I think that was an American production. I'm not sure. And she was in all the way back another 10 years later. She was in My Husband and I in 1987. And today, lovely Toby still enjoys appearing once in a while when they're in the UK. Doctor Who conventions, which were and are a huge thing, especially in the UK, and she still shows up from time to time to recall her time on these 60s Dalek movies.
Oh, goodness. Now, talk about calling back here, Paul. That name that was in the list of films that she did, Not in Front of the Children, that makes me want to ask, was that the British version of Married with Children?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that might even have been a sketch show, but a comedy sketch show. But I'm not 100% sure because a lot of these shows don't exist anymore, of course. So you know the names or you hear the names, but you don't always know them. But yeah, I'm not sure.
Well, so Doctor Who is quite well associated sort of with the idea of hitchhikers because, of course, you have a kindly older gentleman who's sometimes younger traveling around in this time machine, which is basically the family station wagon in some versions of the show. And from time to time, we have a new person that joins the crew. And so we have this policeman who happens to wander upon things, and he's played by Mr. or shall I say, Sir Bernard Cribbins. Now, hubby, Billy, if you will do us the honors and tell us a little bit about Mr. Bernard Cribbins.
Well, Bernard Cribbins, OBE, was an English actor and singer whose career spanned more than 7 decades. During the 1960s, Cribbins became known in the UK for his successful novelty records, The Hole in the Ground, and Right Said Fred, and for his appearances in comedy films including Two-Way Stretch and the Carry On series, which we actually watched a couple this year. His other on-screen roles include the astronaut Vincent Mountjoy in The Mouse in the Moon, Elbert Perks in The Railway Children, the barman in Felix Forsyth's Alfred Hitchcock's Frenzy, and the pretentious hotel guest Mr. Hutchinson in Fawlty Towers' episode The Hotel Inspectors. On the television, he was a regular and prolific reader for the BBC series Jack and Mary from 1966 to 1991. He narrated the children's television program The Wombles from 73 to 75, and he played the title role in the CBeebies series Old Jack Boat from 2013 to 2015. In the 1966 film Daleks Invasion Earth 2150 AD, Cribbins portrayed in the 1966 film Daleks Invasion Earth 2150 AD, Cribbins portrayed Tom Campbell, a companion to Doctor Who, and surprisingly, 41 years later, he began appearing in the revival series of Doctor Who as Wilfred Mott, the grandfather of regular companion Donna Noble and temporary companion to the 10th Doctor.
Oh, and of course, those of you listening who may be Doctor Who fans will recall that Donna is set to reprise her role in the upcoming anniversary episodes.
Yeah, and Bernard Cribbins was, he's only quite recently died. He used to live down the road from where I live now, but I never met him. But he was seen on set when they were filming the David Tennant Return episodes, which haven't yet been screened. So it was very close to the time when he passed those. So whether he features briefly as a cameo or because he appears in scenes where he's in a wheelchair. So whether that was him in real life or him as the character in a wheelchair, we'll have to wait until November to find out.
I want to say about Cribbins and his role as policeman Tom is I thought really one of the cutest things about tonight's movie was the way his character bookends the film, because it starts with him coming upon a robbery, and he runs into a telephone booth to
Mhm.
make a call for help. And of course, it's not really a telephone booth. It's the time machine of Doctor Who, and that's how he comes into the whole adventure. And then, cutely enough, they return back in time, but just a smidge earlier, so that Bernard Cribbins has time to capture the two robbers at the very end of the movie, the two that he ran into at the beginning, and he just clonks them on the head with one of those things, a billy club or something, and drives away with them in his back seat, and he's just really proud of himself. So I thought that was a wonderful way to end the movie.
And he
And
was so proud of himself, and I think you're going to conclude with that, Paul.
well, I was going to say he is known for mainly doing comedy roles, and the scene when he's with the Robo-Men, trying to fit in with them when they're getting their dinner. I'm pretty sure that was there for him to be able to do some sort of slapstick comedy scene.
Yeah,
Which is kind of
let's talk about that now that we're getting into the movie. That scene in particular, to me, felt so out of place because it was so comedic, and the music even tells you, "Hey, you guys, this is supposed to be really funny, so laugh it up." I mean, they just have this goofy score. By the way, the score on this movie is all over the place. What a mess it was. Anyways, I just thought, what? It's a lengthy scene, and it's totally played for laughs. And I think you're
the
right. Yeah.
the in the first movie, the sort of guest male role is played by an actor called Roy Castle, and he is also known for being a sort of comedian. And so yeah, having Bernard Cribbins in this one kind of fits along that sort of getting that character in as a sort of well, at least with the potential of doing a comedy scene. Or
Yeah. And it really was a comedy scene in the middle of a movie. Think of the humor in uh, modern Marvel Universe movies. There's a lot of humor in those movies, but it's really well mixed into the whole thing. But this was like a comedy scene in the middle of a science fiction movie. Uh, and so I just thought, wow, this is really crazy. This is nuts.
So
The
we,
I Love Lucy moment where the food machine
Yeah.
does not turn off was very reminiscent of the I Love Lucy episode where they go and make chocolates and the machine gets sped up. I mean,
I,
there was a few things, especially in that room, like them jumping through the garbage disposal to escape. Yeah,
that could have ended badly.
it
yeah.
could have.
could have been a mincing machine under the. Under
That's exactly what DJ and I was saying. I mean, they did just throw it out or what? I mean,
Yeah.
Just in time for the holidays, Paul. Mince pies.
Apparently, the dump leads directly to outside, and there was no
Yeah.
garbage or anything down there when they
Maybe.
escaped. I had to wonder if maybe that was an inspiration for a scene in Star Wars where they escape by going down a chute and end up in a real mushy dumpster.
So plans to recycling plans has obviously been dumped by 2150.
Right. Well, all I can say is that there clearly was not a garbage strike at the time.
Right.
and nobody wants to be under the Dalek ship when the
No.
Daleks decide to empty their casings.
Oh, yes, some blue ice going on there. So, hubby, we were just talking about how when Bernard Cribbins' character has celebrated his win, and he's driving off in the car to take the hoodlums in, and he's sort of patting himself on the back. Do you remember the moment of irony, though, as he's carrying on in the car, and it pertains to an accomplishment later in his life? Do you remember?
The OBE, the Order of the British Empire.
Yes, he's congratulating himself and he's saying, oh, I'm going to be knighted. And, it was many, many years before Bernard Cribbins could even consider that even possible. But it's just a favorite fan moment callback where it's like, oh, hey, he talked about it and it eventually happened.
Yeah, in real life. That's interesting. So, uh, uh, this movie was a little all over the place. I really enjoyed it. Some of the scenes were even exciting, maybe a little thrilling. And for me, I thought the special effects were also all over the place. There was one scene where it was so clearly a painted backdrop that I just said, "You gotta be kidding me!" But other scenes, the models of the spaceship were so right on, uh, except for the fire on the mountain. That made it obvious it was a model. But uh, that spaceship was pretty well done.
I don't know whether uh, the copy I watched was from my early noughties DVD. I don't know whether they've done the work to later releases, but you can see the strings, particularly in the early scenes on the spaceship. But I love the spaceship. It's done so well, and so it just really looks like it's there. Not in every shot, but in some shot with the clouds, it really does look like. I don't know if there were larger size models as well as smaller size ones, but it's one of my favourite UFOs in any sort of film, certainly from that era. It's really well done. But yes, I can see the strings a few times on my print anyway. But
the first scene when it first arrives was excellent. We watched it on the big screen, and you couldn't even see the strings or anything. And it seems to degrade as the film goes on. You can see the strings, but they did do an excellent job. And Toppy, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Something that I was quite shocked about when looking at behind the scenes, the whole scene of the burned out village, the whole city that was burned out. I thought that was filmed on location somewhere. It wasn't. It was actually a set. A lot of the buildings were done on a soundstage. Did you realize that during the movie that they were sets, or did you think that they were on location?
I think it varies. There was one dead giveaway, and that's what I mentioned. It's so obvious it's a painted backdrop, and that was on one of the sets with wreckage in the foreground, and then a wrecked city in the background that was so obviously painted. So, yes, I did. I did know they were sets because and that was the dead giveaway, that painted background.
Ironically, one of the things that's different between the TV version and the film version is in the TV version, they actually did go around some of the London locations, like very early in the morning, and get some film footage of the character, some of the characters, sort of as a sort of chase sequence, and there was a lot of promotional photos at the time of the Daleks crossing by Big Ben. So. The BBC version did actually have more actual real London in it than the movie version. Although, they still did very well, but you wouldn't necessarily be 100% sure that it was London so much. But.
Yeah, and what do you guys think about this? I think it was obviously a budget concern. I mean, obviously this movie had a much bigger budget than those television productions, but still, it wasn't a really great big production. Although our movie tonight had a bigger budget than the first one, the previous year, but there was no attempt. And this movie takes place in 2150. 2150. That's a long goddamn time in the future. But there was no attempt to make anything look futuristic on Earth. And I just thought, wow, they missed out on that, but I'm assuming it was just a budgetary thing. They didn't have the money to do it. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, it makes you wonder whether they couldn't have just put a line sort of saying, the country's been in decay for years.
That's what
yeah, a very long time. But that wasn't. Yeah, they could have explained it with a line, like with the policeman sort of saying, "God, it doesn't look that much different to the."
Yeah.
I recognize this neighborhood.
Yeah.
I don't
End of part 1.